Hello, how are you? How is your week? I hope you enjoy every moment of it. I pray tonight that the Lord will bless you with His wisdom so you can understand His loving promises. And may He continue to guide you and protect you and give you His love, joy, and peace. Tonight we're going to study 2 chapters because they are connected. I will not read chapter 9, so please read it on your own for a deeper understanding. Last chapter was about the ordination service, and the chapters prior to that were instructions from Moses about the various offerings and rituals. And now this chapter, chapter 9, Moses summons the newly consecrated priests to begin the public ministry at the tabernacle. In another word, inaugurating their priestly work. They are to perform their duties in real life, but with Moses at their side. The service began on the 8th day. Moses continued to tutor the priests, God's instruction of what transpires in the public worship. The beginning of service, they first offered sin offering and burnt offering for Aaron, the high priest, and then a sin offering and burnt offering for the rest of the people, and including the other priests. Finally, a fellowship offering was offered together with the grain offering that is mixed with olive oil. It is a free will and thanksgiving offering from everyone and for everyone to enjoy. This was the last offering ritual that everyone get to enjoy the fellowship by sharing the meal together. And this offering, in the previous chapter, also call it the peace offering. So it's the same. Fellowship offering and peace offering, they are the same. So after the service was over, Aaron lifts his hands towards sky, faces the people, and he blessed them. The words of his blessing are not recorded here, but many commentators suggest that the priestly blessing in Numbers, the book of Numbers, chapter 6, 24 to 26, might have been spoken here. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. After the blessing, Moses and Aaron entered the tabernacle for the first time, perhaps to offer further prayers that God will honor the ministry that is at its very beginning. And when they come out, they bless the people a second time. And at that very moment, the glory of the Lord appears to all the people. If you read the chapter, you'll notice the statement, "The glory of the Lord will appear to you," was mentioned twice by Moses. Do you remember the previous time that God appeared to this group of people? It was at Mount Sinai, right? God appeared to them like a devouring fire on top of the mountain. You can look back in Exodus chapter 24. And then there was another time. It was after Moses constructed the tabernacle. And this same glory, enveloped by a cloud, filled the tabernacle up. You can go back and look in Exodus chapter 40. And here again, the people saw the glory of the Lord. And then moments later, fire came out from the Lord to consume the sacrifices that the people had presented. So what is the significance of all these? Feeling the glory of the Lord denotes God's approval and His presence. One observation from here, the phrase "all the people" appeared twice in the last 2 verses of this chapter. In both instances, confirming that God's presence is visible and available to the whole congregation. What does it tell us? It tells us that it is not enough that God appears to Moses and Aaron, but all the people must be able to witness God's approval. They must see the reality of God's presence and be able to respond with worship and joy and commitment. And before I move on to chapter 10, I also observe in this chapter that Moses repeated twice that the ritual that they were performing were commanded from God. Verse 6, it said, "This is what the Lord has commanded you." And then verse 7, "As the Lord has commanded." So why the emphasis on obedience? Why was Moses so careful? Was it really necessary to keep nagging the priests when ritual, the word itself, means adhering to the prescribed order? Well, the answer will come now in chapter 10. And we'll see before the day is over, the priests had already forgotten what Moses had taken such great pains to teach them. Chapter 10 has 3 parts. Number 1, there was a problem during the inauguration service involving the priest's misconduct. Verse 1, Aaron's son Nadab and Abihu took the censers, put fire in them, and added incense. And they offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, contrary to his command. So fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Moses then said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord spoke of when he said, 'Among those who approach me, I will prove holy. In the sight of all the people, I will be honored.'" Aaron remained silent. Moses summoned Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, "Come here, carry your cousins outside the camp, away from the front of the sanctuary." So they came and carried them, still in their tunics, outside the camp, as Moses ordered. Then Moses said to Aaron and his son Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not let your hair become unkempt, and do not tear your clothes, or you will die, and the Lord will be angry with the whole community. But your relatives, all the Israelites, may mourn for those the Lord had destroyed by fire. Do not leave the entrance to the tent of meeting, or you will die, because the Lord's anointing oil is on you." So they did as Moses said. The priestly misconduct described here reminds us something about humanity. This was the 8th day, the first day after everything has been put in place after much instructions. Priestly obedience was emphasized over and over. And this narrative connects with 2 other foundational narratives on the Torah that tells us about the nature of man and God's holiness and his mercy and long-suffering. If you recall, in the first book of the Bible, Genesis, in the very beginning, chapter 1 and chapter 2, it gives us the narrative of God's good and very good creation established in 7 days. And then on the 8th day, what happened? Man was corrupted. Sin entered and corrupted God's good creation. You can read that in chapter 3 of Genesis. And then we go to the second book of the Bible, Exodus, in chapter 19. After God had created or established a covenant relationship with Israel, remember he revealed to them the 10 commandments, right? The blueprint of the covenant. And he declared that his holiness, his covenant's holiness, through symbolic meaning of the tabernacle. This is in Exodus 25 to 31. But then what happened? they violated immediately what God had told them. They built and worshiped the golden calf. And this is in Exodus 32. So God punishes the people, but then he restored the covenant later on. And this is in Exodus 33 and 34. And he resumed the instruction that would help the people to realize God is holy and he is still with them. And this is in Exodus 35 to 40. And now in Leviticus chapter 8 through 10, the storyline is essentially the same. God created something and the people uncreated them. God created the ritual system that symbolized his plan of salvation, and the two priests uncreated them. Corruption came in again. The death of Aaron's son is shocking. What do they do that was so wrong? And why was God punishing them so severely? The passage said they offer unauthorized fire. What does that mean? Some scholars said that it could have been some unauthorized coals that they had taken from some place other than the altar of burnt offering, which God himself has just lit. Remember in chapter 9? God sent fire from heaven to lit and to consume the sacrifices. So why was the punishment so severe? We saw how God showed his presence at the end of chapter 9, right? God was dwelling in the tabernacle. The holiness of God is something we mortals have not yet understand. I think whatever the two brothers did is probably equivalent to crossing the boundary at the bottom of Mount Sinai when God told them, even the animals, to stay away from there, except Moses, because God was there and the place was holy. Furthermore, the entire tabernacle system was about the plan of salvation to the planet Earth. God himself was the leader who was giving detailed instructions to his assistant Moses. And in turn, Moses gave the instruction to the priests. The instructions were so thorough and detailed that it lasts days. I suppose the brothers didn't perceive the utmost importance of it all, and they performed their duty frivolously. Perhaps I could equate this to the crime of someone who sabotaged against a government. In the United States, this could put someone to prison for 20 years. And if death results from the sabotage, the sentence can be life in prison. Here, the mistakes of the brothers could cause the entire community to misunderstand the plan of salvation, and therefore could cause the people their eternal life. This is at the very beginning of putting the system at work, and God himself was even there. What were the brothers thinking of? Let's read a quote from this book called The Sanctified Life. It said, "The effect of a sacred office thus misused and abused, and thus wrongly occupied, is to bring the truth, the Bible, the ministry, and the ordinances of God into contempt. It produces hardness of heart, and is bound to beget irreverence. Let the man who handles holy things be a holy man, and a man called of God, and not by man." And then what did Jesus say? Let's look at Matthew chapter 18, verse 5 and 6. "And whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. But if anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." So You can see that how serious it is if we cause even one of this little one to lose his or her salvation. And Jesus gave a good example. Matthew 12:20. He said, a bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out, till he leads justice to victory. Another question. Why couldn't Aaron and his surviving sons mourn for Nadab and Abihu? After the death of Nadab and Abihu, the surviving priests accepted God's punitive action and showed the solidarity with God's holiness. Under the circumstances, mourning would be construed as sympathy for the sinners. Inspired natural emotions for their flesh and blood, the priests belong to God first. Now, the second part of this chapter, it is an instruction coming from God about priestly behavior. Perhaps because of the disaster, God has to give this instruction in case something else would happen. Verse 8. Then the Lord said to Aaron, you and your sons are not to drink wine or other fermented drink whenever you go into the tent of meeting, or you will die. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come, so that you can distinguish between the holy and the common, between the unclean and the clean, and so you can teach the Israelites all the decrees the Lord had given them through Moses. In the ancient Near Eastern texts, we read that alcoholic drinks were included with sacrificial meals for their heathen gods. But however, here, Jehovah God prohibited this. The priests were not allowed to have alcoholic beverages once they entered the tabernacle. The priests were expected to be able to distinguish holy and common, pure and impure. They were the teachers of the people. They were to teach the Lord's instruction to the community. God's instructions seem harsh, but his warning was for the purpose of preventing disasters. A scholar once said, dazed officials in the most powerful facility on earth, which is the tabernacle, would be like an inebriated engineer in a nuclear power plant. The potential for a meltdown is real and could affect a lot of people. Now we are coming to the third part of the chapter. Another presenting problem concerning priestly behavior and its resolution. Let's read the following verses. Try to find out why the priest had to eat the meat that has been offered. Verse 13. Moses said to Aaron and his remaining sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, take the grain offering left over from the food offering prepared without yeast, and present it to the Lord, and eat it beside the altar, for it is most holy. Eat it in the sanctuary area, because it is your share and your son's share of the food offering presented to the Lord, for so I have been commanded. But you and your sons and your daughters may eat the breast that was waved and the thigh that was presented. Eat them in a ceremonially clean place. They have been given up to you. They have been given to you and your children as your share of the Israelites' fellowship offerings. The thigh that was presented and the breast that was waved must be brought with the fat portion of the food offerings to be waved before the Lord as a wave offering. This will be the perpetual share for you and your children, as the Lord has commanded. Now, when Moses inquired about the goat of the sin offering and found that it has been burned up, he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, Aaron's remaining sons, and asked, why didn't you eat the sin offering in the sanctuary area? It is most holy. It was given to you to take away the guilt of the community by making atonement for them before the Lord. Since its blood was not taken into the holy place, you should have eaten the goat in the sanctuary area, as I commanded. Aaron replied to Moses, "Today they sacrifice their sin offering and the burnt offering before the Lord. But such thing as this have happened to me. Would the Lord have been pleased if I had eaten the sin offering today?" When Moses heard this, he was satisfied. A couple of questions you might ask. Why did the priest require to eat part of the sin offerings? The priests were instructed to eat part of the sin offering for two purposes. Number one, it was the priestly compensation for their work. Number two, it denotes some kind of expiation or atonement. By eating part of the meat, the priests were actually carrying the sons of the offerers, those people who offer the sacrifices, as the Lord does, right? God is the one that actually carries the sin of the offerer, the people who offers the sacrifice. Why was this priest qualified to do that? And because he was ordained. And that's why the ordination service was so solemn. In this ceremony, they asked for purification through the sin offering. They also dedicate their whole entire life through the burnt offering. And then after this, God's holiness was conferred upon them. And so you might ask, so yes, okay, the high priest and the priest, they carried all these sins of the offerers in them, symbolized by eating the meat. But then they are human too. Don't they sin? Do they reap any consequences? Well, you see, later on we're going to discuss more in detail. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest will put his hand on a goat. And this goat, they name it Azazel. And he put the hands on the goat, symbolize transference of all his sins. All the sins as accumulated through all this time in the tabernacle and on himself. And after that, after he put his hand on this goat, Azazel, and this goat would be banished to the wilderness. And when they banish the goat, that means that the sin is gone away. The sin is cleansed. And the second question, we observe that Moses became very angry when he discovered the priest didn't eat the meat. And Aaron responded in a way that satisfied Moses. So what is the meaning of Aaron's answer to Moses? I had just explained that through eating the meat of the sacrifice, the officiating priest actually bears the guilt or iniquity of the offerer and contributed to the process of atonement, right? And in this instance, the priest, he didn't eat the meat. He burned up all the sacrifices. And so that made Moses very angry. And Aaron explained to Moses that he and his surviving sons abstained from eating it was not a careless mistake of theirs, but a choice. He felt he and his sons were unworthy to bear the iniquity of others on this very day, because of two of his sons were fallen under divine condemnation. And Moses approved, implies that the sacrifice would remain valid, even though it was not done according to the norm. So, what can we learn from this chapter, from this tragedy? Number one, holiness of God. The chapter emphasizes the importance of approaching God with reverence. Nadab and Abihu's unholy action reminds us to honor God's holiness in our worship and conduct. Number two, obedience to God's command. The seriousness of obeying God's instruction is highlighted here. Believers are called to align their lives with biblical teachings rather than inventing their own ways of worship. Number 3, consequences of actions. The swift consequences faced by Nadab and Abihu underscore that actions have repercussions, prompting Christians to consider the weight of their choices. Number 4, the role of leaders. The passage reflects the responsibility of spiritual leaders to model godliness and discernment. Leaders today are encouraged to lead by example and maintain integrity. Number 5, worship in spirit and truth. True worship involves both authenticity and adherence to God's guidelines. Christians are urged to cultivate a sincere relationship with God while respecting His directives. These lessons call for a thoughtful and respectful approach to faith, emphasizing the importance of holiness, obedience, and responsible leadership. A lot to think about, isn't it? Happy Sabbath.